All right, we are live now, and we're going to wait for our guest to join us. Hey,
Hey, Arin.
how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks. I've always got to orient myself. The
I
camera
know.
is a little different when someone else pops in.
Yeah. Hold on. You're also really loud. I'm going to turn you down so that. There we
I
go.
get that. I get
Okay.
that a lot. Sorry.
Okay. Great. There we go.
So looking forward to the IG live today. And it's a very auspicious day for us to be doing this IG live together. We'll get into that a little bit, or maybe give a couple more minutes for people to join us
Sure.
live, and then we'll start. In the meantime, maybe I'll just introduce Epilogue and what we're doing here. For people who haven't joined before, I'm Arin Klug. I'm one of the co-founders and the COO of Epilogue. We are an online estate planning platform that helps people get their basic legal estate planning documents, and by that I mean wills, powers of attorney, created online, simply automated in as little as 20 minutes from the comfort of their own homes.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we like to do is host Instagram lives like this, where we bring on guests in the insurance and financial planning, people talking about end of life and things like that, to educate our community about things like that. So without further ado, we'll get started, and I'm going to introduce our guest for today. Mallory McGrath is the the founder. I'm the co-founder. She is just the founder, the only one and only, and
Yes.
CEO of Viive Planning. Mallory, welcome.
Thank you, Arin. I'm so happy to be here, especially on this day, right? Great day for
Yeah,
us to do this.
it's a great day for us to do this, and we'll get into that.
Mhm.
Um, so before we do, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Viive Planning?
Sure. So, V Planning is a company that works with clients and their families to collaboratively plan for the aging and end of life process. So, we focus on meeting with clients, getting a really good understanding, not just of their, shall we say, traditional estate planning plans like their will, power of attorney, like you guys handle, and also their finances, but we really try to focus on what their family dynamics are, what their potential aging process will look like, and also their end of life wishes.
So it's a really good segue into this day that we've been leading up to. So
Yep.
today, April 16th, is Advanced Care Planning Day.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about that and explain to us what you see advanced care planning as being and how that fits into what you guys do.
Sure. I think this day is a great day. And I mean, we've been posting all month for Advanced Care Planning Month. Whether that's a thing or not, I don't know, but I have made it a thing. If anything, I think we should be posting daily, trying to get people to understand the importance of advanced care planning. For me, I look at it kind of with a three-pronged approach. I think there's three elements that we should all be focused on when thinking about advanced care planning. So the first for me is unexpected illness or injury. No matter your age, an illness could come up that leads you needing additional care or even that makes you incapacitated, and same thing with an injury. And so being able to imagine those scenarios happening and deciding what your views are and your wishes for your life and your body are really important. The second is the aging process. And whenever I mention aging, a lot of people, especially if I'm talking with, millennials or Gen X, they're like, well, I'm young. I don't have to think about it. But I'm not a doctor or a scientist in any way, but there's a lot of evidence out there that if you treated your body like, garbage in your 20s and 30s, that's going to impact your aging process down the line. So really thinking about aging at any age, looking at your parents and how they aged and reflecting on that for yourself is a really key thing to do. And then the third is end of life. And I mean, this past year has taught us with COVID-19 that end of life can come at any time. I mean, yes, it went after immunocompromised people and elderly people, but there were a lot of people our age, Arin, that had this disease, maybe survived, but have long-lasting effects, or unfortunately succumbed to this disease. So having end-of-life conversations, I think, is the third element of advanced care planning that is really important. And at Viive Planning, this is exactly what we do. We are advanced care planners, and we are trying to look at this very holistic, well-rounded view of how anyone at any age can plan for the life they want to have, and if they're lucky enough, plan for the death that they would like to have.
I think that's so important. I mean, what we do at Epilogue and what, Daniel and I did when we were practicing as lawyers is we created legal documents for people, right? Like you said, the wills, the powers of attorney. That's what you're describing, I think, is the start of the process. That's not the end of the process.
Yeah.
So, once you have the wills in place, if they just end up in a drawer somewhere and no one ever looks at them or no one knows what and often the people whose will it is, they don't even remember what it says, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what's that process like? I think, I had clients say to me, I would draft their wills, they would come to the office, they would sign them. We would keep the original wills in our office and they would get copies and they would ask me, what do I do with these now? Like, am I supposed to tell my kids that I've done my will? What would you say to something like that?
Yeah, I actually wrote a blog for you guys. I think it was called the valid will versus an effective will. And if you get a will or power of attorney drafted by a lawyer like you, or you use Epilogue's platform, I mean, it's going to be a valid will. And that's great. But I mean, I worked as a litigation law clerk for over a decade, and in estate litigation specifically. And even with perfectly valid wills, people still contest those wills. People still fight over what's in it, usually because mom and dad didn't share what was in that will. And so when I talk about a valid will versus an effective will, I'm saying, what can you do to make that piece of paper effective? Because if it's just sitting in the vault at your lawyer's office, or you've got it in that random drawer in your house and no one's ever seen it, I don't think it's very effective, because you're keeping your legacy a secret. And in a family, is that really what we want to do? I mean, for me, I'm 34 years old, and I think I'm on my third will, which people find a little shocking that I've had 3. And the one that I've had now, I've had the longest, actually. But every year I pull it out and I read it, because I want to make sure that it is still effective, that everything that I've shared with my husband, with my parents and siblings is still the same, that nothing's changed, that no updates need to be made, and that the communication that I sent to them was important. I think it's really key that when you get a will and a power of attorney made, that you have sat down with, whether it's your children, or it's, say you're my age, you might name your spouse, but then name a sibling or name a parent as a secondary option. I think it's important that everyone who's named in a will or power of attorney, or even the people who aren't named, who might think that they would have been, actually receive copies of this document, because then it's out there. And from a law clerk perspective, because I think in that way, I think about constantly having evidence of everything that I do all the time. If you send that over email, you save the email with a copy of your will in your fireproof box, because that's where I keep mine. And I have that email still at home, where I sent everything out explaining the choices for guardianship for my child, for if both my husband and I were to die at the same time, what would happen, things like that. That way it limits the possibility of people arguing during their grief, or even worse, being greedy during their grief.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, these documents give legal effect to the decisions that you're making, but rarely do they explain why you've made those
Exactly.
decisions.
There's no why.
There's no place for that in the will.
No.
And what I used to tell clients of mine is the worst thing you could do is leave a will that leaves people with unanswered questions, because by the time something happens to you and they pull it out, they're going to have these questions. It can lead to things like fights in the family,
Exactly.
and you're not around to answer those questions anymore, right?
Exactly.
So, there's people have perfectly good reasons for doing things, making decisions about in a will about who to leave something to, or who to appoint as executor, or who to not appoint as executor or guardian. And yeah, the will is not the place to explain those decisions, but the conversation or the email is it's something that has to accompany it. It makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. Yeah. Mhm.
So you've described, advanced care planning and, doing it in case of, age-related or injury or, things that are unexpected. It
Mhm.
really sounds like, if I would have thought about advanced care planning, a little while ago, it would have been something that only people who were older had to worry about. It doesn't sound like that's the case. Is that so?
Oh, I completely agree with that statement. I think that when it comes to anything related to estate planning, and I'll use that huge umbrella, and even previous generations, even the boomers when they were our age, right? They didn't think to do it themselves because you're young and you're not thinking about getting old and you're not thinking about dying. You're thinking about living your life, buying your house, maybe having some kids, and like that's where your mindset is. But unexpected things happen. And especially when I talk with anyone around my age who's married, and oh my gosh, if they have kids, I am on them to make sure that they have certain things in place. And it's very hard to think about at any age, you're aging an end of life process. And I don't diminish the difficulty of it, but it is so pivotal for millennials to understand how important it is for them to be making plans. And pre-COVID, we really started to see a death positivity movement with the
Yep.
millennial generation, which I think is really great. And that's something that, I think is still out there, but as it has for the past, 13 months now, COVID is just in our face, and that's all we can think about. But that's also an opportunity for us as younger people to recognize the importance of planning. We see our friends and family around our age getting sick with this illness, and how important it is to make sure that you know what choices you want. I actually had an interesting conversation with a client who's sort of a later Gen X age, and she was very adamantly for any form of life-saving measures. And we had worked together really early on in the COVID process. And then she messaged me a couple months ago and said, I really would like to make a change to my power of attorney because actually I don't want to be on a ventilator if I get
Hmm.
COVID. I've just seen so much negativity come from that. And I just don't know if I'd bounce back. And she had some family history of things that might help her to come to that decision. And like that's a really big thing that has changed in her mindset from one
Right.
extreme to the other. And I think that's so important to recognize also that planning is important now, and then it's important a year from now, and the next year, and the next year, and the next year. This is not a one-time occurrence. This is a fluid conversation that has to happen throughout your whole life.
We find that that's one of the hurdles, one of the things that stop people from actually getting their estate planning, their will planning done. People feel as though they have to wait for the right time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still young. Okay, when my family, once I have all of my kids, that's when I'll do my estate planning. And you
Yeah.
have all your kids, so it's like, well, I'm still growing my business, or I still don't have all of the assets I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
own. So, doing a will or creating an advanced care plan, as you're saying, is something I'll do when the time is right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I
One of the things that we try to do is sort of get people over that hurdle by explaining that exactly what you just said. It's a fluid process. These things
mhm.
evolve, and just it's not a one and done. You can do it, and you should review it regularly and update it regularly.
Exactly, 100%. I think it's something that should be very consistently checked in. And at Vive Planning, we actually have something called a periodic review, which takes that pressure off the client. So what we do is depending on a person's age. So let's say we take you, Arin, and your family. I would say we'll check in 3 years' time. So in 3 years, you get this automatic email. And if you answer no to everything, then I can write back and go, hey, Arin, you guys are good. I'll chat to you in 3 more years. Where if you
Right.
say, oh, by the way, I sold Epilogue, I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of a huge deal. Let's have a chat about that and see if that impacts the plans that we had made previously when we created your aging and end of life plan. So I think that by having that element, it removes the weight or the just the need for people to remember the importance of updating, and just gives them the peace of mind to go live their life knowing that someone else is going to be that check-in point for them every few years.
It's a great service and people need it because these aren't the things. It's a good thing, truthfully, that people don't think about these things regularly.
Yeah.
It would be very tough if you went through your life every day thinking like, okay, like what's going to happen to me? Do I need to update my will?
Yes.
Having somebody to facilitate that check-in is really helpful.
Hmm.
We had a question come through.
Hmm.
Someone wants to understand a little bit more about the death positivity movement. What does that mean?
Sure, yeah. So we saw a lot, pre-COVID, a lot of death cafes popping up, and these were support groups for people who, yes, maybe had lost someone or knew they were going to lose someone, or who just had like a lot of questions about death and felt really confused about it and confused about their choices if they were to find out they were dying. And it was really just sort of like a community place where there'd be no judgment about talking about these sorts of conversations. We've also seen a lot of millennials really take, like really get active about what will happen to their body when they die. And, you know, we
Hmm.
see that with companies popping up like Irene Cremations, right?
Yep.
And I learned about, I don't even know the word now. So there's cremation and aquamation.
I
Is that
just
the
heard about
word?
that.
I
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
heard, and I was watching it. I was like, this is insane that this is possible, but how great that this doesn't impact the environment in the way that cremation and burial does. And I think that what millennials are seeing is we're a very environmentally focused generation. And so that in turn has kind of gone into this death positivity movement of how can I make sure that my impact is as low as possible? If I were to pass away 10 years from now when I'm 44, how is that going to impact my environment, the environment, impact my family? I want to make this as cheap and as effective and efficient as possible so that
Hmm.
everyone can focus on what they should be focusing on, which is grief, not this whole process of what to do with Mallory's body and where's the money going and who's going to help out her husband and like if I can have all that in place, then sure, it's not like I would look forward to a premature death, but at least I know that things are taken care of and they can focus on that grief and recovery process.
Yeah, I mean, speaking from personal experience, right? There's situations where, you find yourself in these unfortunate situations, and
Mm-hmm.
these decisions about what's going to happen are going to be made. They have to be made. There's no
Sure.
choice. You can't just sort of opt out or abstain.
Mm-hmm.
Decisions have to be made. And so, for each individual to be able to express what they would want those decisions to be, whether it's through a formal legal document like a will or a power of attorney, or
Mm-hmm.
through a letter to family or an email or conversations that are documented in some way. It's a really powerful but really important thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the peace of mind you get from knowing that your wishes are going to be followed through, but it's the burden that you're taking off other people, and I think people really underestimate that piece of it.
Mhm. I'm smiling because in my head, so I wouldn't forget, I was going burden, 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 so that
Yeah,
I can make it a point. But a lot of times people say to me, I don't want to, especially boomers, they'll say, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a burden to my family.
right.
And I'm like, okay, so having the conversation to you means you're going to be a burden by asking them to sit down and have that conversation. And I'm not diminishing that it's gonna be hard. It's really gonna be hard because no child wants to think of their parent dead, and no
Yeah.
parent wants to think about leaving this grieving child behind. But I mean, the thing I always say is you're going to be a burden as you age. You're not getting away from that. So you might as well just buy in. But the way to alleviate the level of burden that you are is by putting plans in place and expressing what you want. So if you find yourself incapacitated, a child can jump in and go, no, mom would want to stay in her home. So we're going to pull money from this investment and pay for the PSW. Or if someone passes unexpectedly. No, I know that dad really didn't want to be buried. He wanted to be cremated. Okay, so then we're going to go ahead and do that. And there's a lot of administrative elements to death that happen. And if you have to sit there and figure them out when really you should be taking a moment to grieve and think about your life without that person, that's so important. So I always say you being a burden is not having a conversation. Being a burden is leaving your grieving child with 1,000 things to do when all they want to do is reflect on their life with you.
Yeah, and one other point, it's not just 1,000 things to do, it's 1,000 things to do that they've never done before
Yes,
and have
yeah,
no experience doing. And
exactly.
now
Yeah,
you're
sorry.
telling make all these decisions, right? Like,
Yeah, estate administration. I mean, I've handled a fair amount of estates before, especially in my previous life as a law clerk, and it's hard. This is not something that's easy. And as a society, we just expect random individuals with no training whatsoever to administer an estate and all that that encompasses. And these people are grieving. And we
yeah,
expect them to get this form filed within 30 days of death, get that one filed within 60 days. it's so unfortunate that that's the way our world works, but there are ways to at least prepare for that, especially if you do have an aging parent where you know you've probably got some time, right? You can put a plan in place that makes that process easier for your loved ones.
So, I mean, these conversations, they're hard, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they are, if we want to talk about like two things that are taboo that you don't talk about in polite society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's death and it's money, right?
Yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
here you are saying to everyone, like, have these conversations about death and about money, right?
Yep.
So, what are the things that you hear from people? Like, it's not the right word to use, but like, what are
Mm-hmm.
the excuses that you hear that, sort of stop people from sitting down and having these conversations?
Mm-hmm. Well, what we talked about before, right? Well, I already have a will, power of attorney, so I don't need to do this.
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, I have enough money to live till I'm 100, so I'm fine. Okay. Um, those are really common. A lot of times people just flat out don't want to think about their own aging process and demise. And I get that. I mean, when I started really, preaching this stuff, I did have someone say, well, have you just sat down and thought about it? And I said, well, of course I did, but I hadn't in a while. And so I made myself sit there and really get into that mode, and it's not pleasant. It's,
Right.
and I had a few glasses of wine to get through it, and that's okay. But it is a really difficult conversation to have, and I don't diminish that. I think what's really key is that is that at the end of the day, you need to look at the people you're going to talk to. So if it were me and I have four parents, so I've got two biological parents and two step parents.
Hmm.
Each one of them is very different in how they receive information, whether that be verbally or written. And so when I communicate something big, whether it be happy big or, somber big, I send it in different ways and I communicate it in different ways. And you don't have to be some brilliant psychologist to figure this out. You just need to be perceptive of the people that you love and that are close to you and how they respond. And so when I talk with them, I talk to them in different ways and using different mediums. I actually had clients who usually we host a collaborative meeting with clients and their families to discuss all of the wishes that they have put together in their aging and end of life plan. And the one client said to me, we're really not a very open family. I said,
Hmm.
okay. And he said, but whenever I have to have a conversation I don't want to have, I write it in a letter and I mail it to them. I said, okay, so do that. And he said, but that's not a collaborative meeting. And I said, but that's what's going to work for your family. And if you are going to be able to pour out your soul and share what you view for your aging process and your death in written word, then do it. And we don't have to ever talk in person. Like, if that's what's going to get through to your family, if that's how you're going to be able to really express what you want, then use that as the medium to share that. Otherwise, I mean, to start conversations, a lot of times, especially if I'm talking with millennials who want to have conversations with their boomer parents,
Hmm.
I encourage them to think of it as if you're parenting your child. So I have a 5-year-old daughter. If I want my 5-year-old daughter to eat her broccoli and I nag her and nag her and nag her and threaten to take away TV and threaten to take away her treats, she's still not going to eat the broccoli, Arin. That's not going to happen. But if I put
Oh,
the
oh, I
broccoli,
know.
yes, right? But if I put the broccoli, I mean, this is a bad example because she actually loves broccoli. But if I put the broccoli on her plate and don't really say anything and just move through dinner, eat the food, talk with my husband, ask her questions, a lot of times she'll try things if I
Hmm.
don't say anything. And what's happening there is she's seeing me eat it. She's seeing me not make weird faces. She's seeing me have a normal conversation while I eat my broccoli. So then I take that and I translate that to having conversations about aging and end of life. Think of your parent as the child in this situation. Show them how good it is to eat the broccoli. Show them how good it is to do your own aging and end of life planning. So when I have millennials come to me and say, hey, can you help my parents? I generally say, well, how can we help you first?
Hmm.
Because if you go to them and lecture them and say, you need to do this, you need to do that, in what world are they going to respond to you telling them that they have to plan to be old? That's not going to go over well. So it's better instead to do that planning for yourself and then use that almost as an invitation into the conversation with your parents. Look at how important this is. Look at what I have done. And now I would like you to do the same thing so that we can all be really planned out for whatever comes our way in either of our lives.
I think that's really good advice. I mean, we see it, on the wills side as well,
Hmm.
where people who have older parents who know that their parents don't have wills in place. And the hesitation is, I don't want to introduce this topic to my parents because I don't want to come off as being greedy,
Greedy.
money
Yeah.
grubbing.
Yeah.
I'm, waiting for something to happen,
Hmm.
or what am I getting?
Yeah.
And so I think that's actually a really brilliant tip. Both on the broccoli side and on the planning side,
Both
just
ways.
just just normalize it. And you mentioned this before, um, that the pandemic has really opened the door, and we're
Hmm.
seeing that a lot too.
Yeah.
These conversations that were taboo are probably a lot less taboo now because of
Yeah.
what you see, unfortunately, in the news on a regular basis, or people
Hmm.
turning their minds. We saw people in the early days of the pandemic turning their minds to estate planning that had never thought of it before. These are
Yeah.
people in their 60s and 70 years old, 70 in their 70s rather, and it just was not a consideration for them at all until this happened. And all of a sudden, it's that aha moment of like life can change at any time, and so I should have a plan in place, and I shouldn't need it, but if I do,
Hmm.
if my family does, it's there.
Exactly. 100%. Hmm.
On the will side, I mean, we've seen some not so great stats in terms of how many Canadians have wills in places. Are there similar stats on the advanced care planning side? I mean, the will is just a strict legal document, and we've tried to make it as
Hmm.
easy as possible for people to go online and create those documents automatically. What you're talking about is more of a process, right? It's a conversation. It's something that takes place over a period of time
Hmm.
and collaboratively, like you said. How many people are having those conversations, or those things that are happening around, you know, dinner tables or Zoom meetings, I guess, as the
Hmm.
case may be these days?
I don't know a specific statistic, but I do know that 23% of Canadians don't talk about money with
Hmm.
anyone. I mean, even just working with clients, I see how it's just not a part of our normal Canadian society to have these conversations. So I wouldn't be surprised if the statistics are staggering, if these conversations are not happening. And I think it's really important that they do, and that we especially as a younger generation start to change the way we view these topics. I mean, a lot of times I think people need permission to talk about death. They view it as, well, if I bring up death in a conversation, if I'm at a dinner party with friends and I talk about, taxes or investing or getting my will done, that all of a sudden I'm bringing up depressing topics over a lovely dinner with a group of people. But this is what it means to be a grown up. There's a lot of really great things, and there's a lot of things you have to do that you just don't want to. And whenever I'm talking with potential clients and they say, I just don't know if I want to do this, I say, well, you file your taxes, right? And they say, yes. I'm like, well, this is as important.
Yeah.
Just because there isn't some government body knocking on your door if you don't do it doesn't mean it's not as important. And you don't have to like the process. I always say that. You don't have to like working with me and like doing this, but you need to understand and respect the importance of what's happening. And I really do hope that as a generation, we can change that mindset. Yes, for the generations older than us, but also for the generations younger, so that we're sort of that starting point, so that when I'm 80, all those generations after me, that this is
Right.
normal to talk about this. It's
Yeah.
normal that every 2 years I sit down at a dinner table and have a conversation about it. I just wish that I really hope that that's the impact that a lot of these new companies like Epilogue and Viive, that we're coming out and changing that mentality for a generation, that we're going to see that ripple effect as we age.
Yeah, we agree with you 100%. I mean, it's the way that we're coming from in terms of
Mhm.
preparing the legal documents, like we've said for, a while. The old way of doing things, it's no wonder people didn't do it, right?
Yeah.
It was, it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's
Hmm.
stuff you don't want to think about, it's stuff you
Yeah.
don't really understand. And for a lot of people, they're of that mindset. Well, nothing's going to happen to me tomorrow, so I'll just do it later, or I'll do it when the
Exactly.
time is right. It's not urgent. Like that's kind of like the perfect recipe to not do something, to procrastinate and sort of
Hmm.
put it off. And then of course you throw in things like talking about death, talking about money. It's just very hard. But I
Hmm.
think you're absolutely right. The work that you're doing is so important in this area. The idea that you're helping people put together advanced care plans.
Mhm.
And I think what companies like us and your company does is help people understand that the plans that they're putting in place are really not for them. It's for their loved ones. It's like you said, the burden, the B word, that
Exactly.
we don't want to leave behind for our loved ones.
Yes, definitely. That's really the most important point is just to imagine a world that when you're not in it anymore. And what is that impact going to be, right? It's like dropping a pebble in the water, right? And we see that ripple effect. If you were to die, right? I can imagine if I were to die tomorrow, what is that ripple effect? What is going to happen to all those people who are constantly in contact with me, who were getting support from me? And what is that going to look like? And how can I to the best of my ability, make sure that they are supported through that process if I were to die.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we're at about time now. I think that's a
Okay.
great note to end on, and I think it gives
Mm-hmm.
people a lot to think about. So today, April 16th, is Advanced Care Plan Day,
Mm-hmm.
and I would encourage everybody to check out viiveplanning.ca, Mallory's website. She's done a fantastic job curating some wonderful content, and we will continue to produce content on this stuff together with Mallory and
Mm-hmm.
others. Irene and Mallory are doing an Instagram live later this afternoon at
At 3:30 actually.
3:30. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so if you caught us for this one, join in on that one too, because I'm sure it's going to be great. And Mallory, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us
Th-
on Advanced Care Plan Day.
Wonderful. Thanks, Arin, and thanks to everyone at Epilogue. It's been great. Have a great weekend.
You too. Take care.
Bye.